Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'll be going through the installation of new spark plugs and spark plug wires for a 2014 Chevrolet Caprice PPV with a 6.0 liter L77 flex fuel engine. The installation of the new plugs and removal of the old stuff is pretty easy. It takes about an hour overall. The filming of it, of course, made that much longer, but it's normally about an hour. You do have to remove the airbox on the driver's side there, which means you do have to loosen this jump start post with that bolt at the base on the strut tower, so you have to disconnect the negative battery cable to accomplish that safely. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's just removing the old plug wires, getting socket on each of the plugs, and then loosening those. And I do use an air compressor to blow out any dirt and grime to make sure it's clean before I remove the spark plugs. The plugs that were listed for this by ACDelco, and most charts when I look up the plugs for ACDelco, it lists a 41-162 plug, although the plugs that came out of the engine were 41-110s. The owner's manual that I recently obtained for this vehicle also lists 41-110s, and the 15 through 17 model years, which are the most similar ones to my 14, also list 41-110s. So I ended up purchasing 41-110s. So that's what I installed into the engine, even though originally I purchased the 41-162s. So let's get into the removal of the plugs and install the new plugs and wires. On the driver's side, I'll show that in more depth, and then on the passenger side, I'll go a little bit more time lapse, but the process is basically the same. And then in the end, of course, you follow it up with a good test drive and verify everything's good afterwards. But make sure when you start this task that the engine is cold, because you will be in close proximity to the exhaust manifolds, and you don't want to burn yourself, and use some proper gloves and safety glasses as necessary. So let's get into it. First, let's remove the baffle here off the air cleaner inlet, and then we'll remove the air cleaner to get access for everything over here. So let's take the 7mm socket and undo these clamps. And before we undo this one, we're going to remove this evap related or PCV related hose, squeezing the two sides and it pulls backwards. And now this should just wiggle off the two ends here. Okay, and now we can move that off to the side. Now we're going to disconnect the mass airflow sensor, because we're going to remove this entire assembly so that we can get the tools in. We may be able to leave the base in, but I'd rather just follow the complete instructions. So we're going to push in on the clamp here to release the clip, and then wiggle this out. And let's move this over to the side somewhere. And then we're going to undo the clamps. And this, and the air filter comes out. And then we have pretty good access at this point, so we could either stop at this point, but it's telling you to remove the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this part as well. It's a 10mm here, and a Torx bit there, and a 10mm up here. That was a T30. To get a little more room, I'm going to have to loosen this bolt that holds this bracket on. We have this sensor up here, which we're going to remove that connector from now. There's a little tab on the bottom, and then that pulls out. With that out of the way, then we don't have to worry about getting intermixed with the spark plug wire removal and spark plugs. Now we're going to remove the spark plug wires, and we're going to remove the top end here first. Let's see how tight they are here. They haven't totally adhered themselves to the coil packs. There we go. Next, we're going to rotate the spark plug wire on the spark plug to remove it from the sticking to the porcelain. Okay, it did seem to come loose. It was a little stuck. And hopefully, grabbing at the boot end only, grab and remove this. And that's been fairly easy. So these must have been taken off at some point. I worked on a Chevrolet SSR just the other week, and these were adhered to the spark plugs. Next, we're going to remove these insulator caps. They're going to be reused on the new wires. Those come off. And these don't look all that bad, but I'm going to replace them with brand new ones as well. So let's move on to the other spark plug wires. We're not going to remove the spark plugs, but initially we're just going to back them off a couple threads and a couple turns, and then blow out the dust and dirt that might be collected around them just in case, so it doesn't drop into the engine. So I have my 5/8 inch spark plug socket, and get that on there. That's why we took this connector off, because it would be right in the way. So I'm just going to break that free, which it should be pretty easy, which it is. Alright. Let's just break those just a hair with this, and then switch to a ratchet. I'm going just to inspect the holes, make sure there's nothing obvious in here. No signs of oil or anything. I want to make sure all the dirt and grime is... Sorry about that camera movement there. But we're using some compressed air to blow those out just in case. Okay, you stand back, you don't want to get this, you may want to wear safety goggles during this. Alright, we're now at the point where we can go ahead and remove each one. We want to note each position just in case we have an issue to track. Actually, that looks pretty good from what I can see here. No signs of oil contamination. Alright, let's take a look at the hole again through the mirror. That's nice and clean. From what I can see of the piston top, it looks okay. Same there. These are pre-gapped at 40 thousandths. And these are going in without any anti-seize. These are the silver style casings. They do not get any anti-seize because that would change torque specifications, which is 11 foot-pounds. Okay, I'm just tightening it by hand at the base there. Okay. Then we'll add in the other plugs and then torque them down all together. You always hand thread this. You never want to attempt to do this with a wrench because you could cross thread it, and you never want to do that, especially with aluminum heads. Just never want to do it. So you always bring them in by finger. At first you gently bring them in to a seated position, and then you can torque them with the torque wrench again at very low 11 foot-pounds. I have my torque wrench set at 11 foot-pounds. That's what's the torque specification in the service repair manual. I checked 2 different ones. It's the same as the other vehicle, my Chevy SSR with an LM4. So let's just torque this up. It's not much torque. Okay, there it's fully seated. Okay, it's 11. It's fully seated and just 11 foot-pounds. Okay, don't want to put any side pressure on spark plugs because the porcelain will get cracked. There's full seat. Okay. There's full seat, I can feel it. And there's 11. Next, we're going to install the spark plug wires, and we're going to insert some dielectric grease at the end that was supplied with the wire kit. And you only want to put it on the end in about 1/4 inch or 5/16, somewhere's in there. That will then lubricate the boot along the porcelain plug so that it hopefully doesn't stick. We found we're pretty lucky with this particular set because it did come off, although we did see a few remnants of the boots on the plugs. Plus we need to make sure we bring over those metal insulators as well. So let's put some lubricant on. Doesn't take much. And just, I take a toothpick, that way I don't use a Q-tip. I don't want any fuzzies from the Q-tip end of it to be left behind. Now that gets nice in there so we don't stick to the porcelain part of the plug. And we do that for each of them. So let's get one of our insulators. Slide that back over there so we've got that on the end. And we're ready to install this one. Let's put this on the back. Reach in. And as I push it down over the spark plug wire tip should go over the top tip of the plug. And it snaps on. There's a little snap that you feel as it goes in place. And then we take the coil pack end and put that in as well. And that's in place as well. And these are the original equipment part number from ACDelco, so these are identical length, so there's no need, on all the plugs they're the same length, so there's no need to pay attention to a particular position. So we'll just repeat that for each of these. You don't want to get it on the electrode itself. This is dielectric grease. Want to make sure it's just there as the lubricant for the boot. Put the protector on it. And let's reach in like I did before. And over the plug tip. You can feel it snap. There we go, it snapped on. And now I'm gonna get the coil end, and that's on. Okay, both on. Make sure those are on all the way. And they appear to be, so if I tug on these, they should stay in place. And they all do. All right, those are all back in place. New plugs, new wires. We're gonna reconnect this sensor up in the front here, because you can see it's right over the plug. So let's get that back in place. It snaps into place. Now we can get the air cleaner infrastructure back in place, and this side's done. I'm gonna reinsert the box into its normal position here. And this bolt should line up with, there's a couple different areas here. So the top mount for the airbox goes on the stud adjacent to the jump start post, and make sure you tighten the bolt at the base of that structure and then put the red protective cover over this and reconnect the negative battery cable before starting the vehicle. Driver's side, 99% done. We have to get the air cleaner stuff on the front, but I'm gonna leave that off for now since that might give it a little more room on the passenger side. Let's switch over there. Now we move over to the passenger side. We're gonna remove the spark plug wires from the coil packs. Pretty easy on this side, gain access to the coil pack end of the wires. There's tighter access towards the firewall portion, so it's a little tighter to reach in there. Plus there's some bolts sticking out, so be careful. I did scrape my arm a couple of times. So you twist the plug wires just like we did on the driver's side and pull them off. And then with the 4 different wires off on this side, we can get the wrenches in there to try to back out the spark plugs next. I'm now going to use that 5/8 inch spark plug socket to back off each of the spark plugs a couple of turns, and the reason for that is so we can blow the compressed air around them to make sure that any dirt or grime that's sitting around the plugs is blown away before we remove the plugs. The space does get a bit tight in the back. In fact, there's a bolt sticking out from the HVAC inlet there, and I snagged my arm there. So be careful of that. And I use a variety of reducers and readapters and handles given the amount of space I have. And I ended up using a universal swivel socket adapter on the rear plug closest to the firewall, because it was just a very tight amount of space there. So make sure you get them backed off a couple of turns so that we can clear that off. I'm going to use a mirror to look at each one just before I blow it out, just to make sure there's nothing else obvious there. And now that I've got the compressed air in here, getting any dirt or grime out of there, I didn't really see any, but just want to make sure that everything's clear before we hand remove the plugs. They should back out by hand since we've already backed them out by a couple of turns with the socket, and everything should be pretty clear here. But once we get each individual spark plug out, we'll check the cylinder head by taking the mirror. And if you have a scope, you can put it inside the spark plug hole and check out the top of the piston and look for the health of the cylinder, but check each spark plug as you take it out as well for a good indication of the health of that particular cylinder. Now we're ready for the new plugs. So we're going to install the plugs on the passenger side, very similar to the driver's side, just a little bit less access space on the rear by the firewall. So start off with that one, and be careful of that bolt sticking up from the HVAC, because I eventually do snag my arm once again with that one. And you hand start the threads, and then I screw down the spark plug with my fingers all the way down to the bottom until the cone taper seat gets up against the head. And that way you're sure it's fully in there. And then I follow it up with the wrenches, and then use whatever appropriate adapters you need to get on that spark plug socket. I used a variety again, just like I did on the removal. And then make sure you torque it to 11 foot-pounds. It's not a very large amount of torque, and again, there's no anti-seize used on these style spark plugs. The silver casings have no anti-seize used during their installation. Make sure you keep the spark plug socket straight on the spark plug so that you don't crack the porcelain of the plug, and use, again, 11 foot-pounds as your torque. That's as much as it is. And make sure you torque them on each one, and then get ready for the plug wire installation next. We're going to install the spark plug wires over here on the passenger side, just like we did on the driver's side. Use the dielectric grease supplied on the inside of the boot that goes over the plug. Put the insulator cap back over the outside of that and that goes over the plug. Snap it into place until you feel it click over the tip of the plug, and then push it up on the coil side. Make sure there's a nice clean straight path between the plug and the coil pack, and make sure it's not touching anything. And with that, you now have all the plug wires installed. Tug on them just a little bit, make sure they stay in place, and then you're done. Now we're going to complete the air filter routing baffle box install. So we've already made sure, I've shown this in the previous segment when I put the air filter cover on. I put the mass airflow sensor connector back in and snapped it into place. So we have to mount it on the throttle body at the end of the mass airflow sensor tubing, and then we have the PCV tube. So let's get this in place. It's not too difficult to get aligned here. Put this off to the side for the moment. Put these clamps in their normal position. And this one takes a little adjustment. There we go, the bottom's on all the way. Yeah, that's on. We're going to leave this on for the moment because we need access there. Adjust the box a little bit so it doesn't hit the radiator. So, clamp is in its intentional seated position. There's a little notch there. That's holding. That's there, so this shouldn't move around. And the last piece is to snap that back into place. So after you test drive the vehicle and confirm everything's working just fine, make sure you check the wires again, make sure nothing's moved out. But again, it's going to be hot. You should attempt this only when the engine is cold, otherwise you're going to get burned. There's too many hot things, and as we can see, my arm was already a victim, and I even had gloves on. So of course, I'm an older guy, so I tend to get scratched a little bit easier and bleed a little easier. But check out the vehicle, make sure it performs correctly. And again, reference the original equipment that you removed as far as if you want to see the performance of the vehicle up to this point in time as a good indication of how it's been behaving and performing internally. Mine looked fairly decent overall. And the plugs and all that, looks like they probably were replaced near 100,000. I don't know, I can't get the full service history on the vehicle. California, they won't release it to you unless you can see it in the Carfax. You can't see it at all. So that's why I decided to do this, just to make sure I got good fresh plugs, good fresh wires. So hopefully, if you found this informational, make sure you hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell notification to make sure that you're notified when I upload new videos like this to the channel. Thanks for coming to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.